わさびアニメ、すごいですね。
Awesome. Well, welcome to Amusement Sparks, the theme park design show. I'm your host, Andrew Spahn, and with me today is Joe from Brave World Anime. I'm not sure if you'll see him above or below me. This is kind of a new experience for both of us. We've done panels at in-person conventions, but this is our first online tribute to a convention, if you will. But we're a theme park design show. It's by fans, for fans. Each episode, I team up with a different fan of a different property, and we brainstorm an immersive theme park around it. So today, as you can see on the screen here, and you saw in the program, we're doing Made in Abyss, which just is an amazing piece of work. And first things first, Joe, can you say a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. My name's Joe. I'm with Brave World Anime. And like Andrew said, this is my first time doing these online. So a little nervous, but used to doing this in person, which should be more difficult, but this is interesting.
It definitely is. It's a different set of nerves, like it's nerve-wracking walking into an anime convention knowing that you're going to be doing a presentation, but I'm in my room, this is where I record all my podcasts. I'm pretty comfortable in this space, but I'm still nervous because I don't get to see people's faces. But hey, we'll see what happens, right? It's 2020. You got to make do with what you can and try to prosper as best you can. But yeah, so what's your experience with Made in Abyss? You're more of an expert on the series than I am.
Yeah, I watched the show when it first aired, so 2017, and it just immediately caught me by surprise. I didn't really have any expectations going into it, but was just blown away by that first episode and had no idea what I was going into. It was just such a great experience throughout.
Yeah, the way I discovered the series was from one of your panels, actually, in person. Um, I don't know exactly what the conversation was, but you had described it somewhat as being like a scarier version of some kind of like Studio Ghibli quality animation. And I was like, that sounds so cool. Like a more mature, more dark Ghibli. Like that's me. That's my vibe. So I really want to check it out. And I did right away. And then here we are, I don't know, 2 years later, making a theme park out of it. So it's different than most anime and most stories, I would say, which anyone who's seen it can connect with. It's a little different. It's a little darker, a little less hopeful. But yeah, it's just kind of different than most anime, right?
Yeah. The Ghibli piece does make sense because you have these characters that have like this cute aesthetic, but yeah, they're put through some very dark and gruesome situations throughout the anime.
Yeah, it's like it's hopeless basically. Like there's like so many stories, so many shonen stories especially are like a journey from home, traveling around the world, and maybe you'll get into some scary situations, but you can always kind of return home, return to safety. There's like the hero's journey type thing, whereas Made in Abyss is largely about going into the abyss, and it's kind of a one-way ticket most of the time. It's extremely dangerous. It's an escalation of danger too as you go through the different levels of the abyss, and we'll show some slides and get into like more specifics about that, but it just makes the series so different than anything else I've ever seen. And the hero is not the chosen one. The heroes are pretty much insignificant to the story. It has almost like a Lovecraftian thing where the abyss doesn't care anything about humanity and barely notices. The abyss just keeps doing its thing, and humans keep trying to dive in there, and it's kind of like human nature, I guess, to try to explore the unknown. But this is a much less hopeful version of that because the abyss is such a fantastical, a fantasy version of representing that. It's like space exploration or exploring the ocean, but those things aren't nearly as scary as the abyss because there's so many monsters and the curse and so much crazy stuff that happens down there. It's wild. But this series was originally published as like a web comic, basically. It doesn't fit in with a lot of other manga, just because it is so much more dark and dire and serious. It's also unusual too because the main characters are children and they're like going into like this very brutal environment. So it wouldn't quite fit in with like a Shonen Jump or something, which I'm a huge fan of Shonen Jump. I'm a big fan of Shonen stories. But this one is just so much different, so much darker, So I think it makes sense that it started out as an online, web comic, but then was adapted into an anime, which is really cool. And they've gone on to make some movies since then. They've been picked up for a second season, which hasn't been. They don't have a date announced yet, but it's a really cool series. If you haven't checked it out, I'd recommend it for sure.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the anime, and then after I watched the anime, I started reading the manga. So I've mostly at the same point in the anime and the manga now. Having just watched the movie last night, the third movie, I'm a little ahead on the anime now. Then, so I need to read some more of the manga to see where it goes.
And there's only 13 episodes in the first season, which has been released, so we'll be light on spoilers, but we do want to give a spoiler warning in case you haven't finished that. The first and second movies are recaps of the first 13 episodes, so there's not that much more new content beyond episode 13, except for the third movie, which I haven't even seen yet, so we won't go into too much detail about that stuff. But luckily, kind of like the series, it's pretty linear. Like, we're going into the abyss. And as we go through this design process, we'll start up here at the surface, which is this kind of ring shaped island, or circular island, I guess, Earth. With That's the abyss right there. If you're not familiar, see how there's an abyss? That's the abyss. And so, kind of like as we're going through this design process, it's going to be brainstorming, it's hypothetical. We're not actually building this theme park, it's just the ideas. It's about exploring this fandom and trying to create something out of it, basically. So we'll be going through the levels as we go. And if we get to a point that you aren't familiar with, you don't want spoilers from that part, feel free to just tune out and then come back for the next piece of the convention. But yeah, so a lot of the theme parks we do on this show are kind of like live action role playing experiences where you get to take the role of someone in that world, right? Like in the Star Trek theme park, for example, people took the role of people on the crew of a spaceship, right? But here, most of the main characters, or the most interesting characters, are the cave raiders, or these kind of treasure hunters, people who go down into the abyss. And Joe, I'm assuming we would want the park guests to be able to step in those shoes when they come into the park, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely the most interesting aspect of the show is diving into the abyss. So I think that would definitely be a center attraction for this park.
Yeah, and as you look at this image here, it's like it's pretty clear that that town kind of revolves around that big hole in the middle, right? Just kind of like a lot of other shows, like let's say Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon. They're kind of all about that one thing, like their central hook to that show. This one central hook is that there's a big abyss right there. But if you look at the town, it makes sense why their way of life would be kind of centered around this amazing, humongous, mysterious geographical feature. It kind of takes over the whole town. Like the people have to adjust their lives to be focused on it. So I think doing this as a theme park, even just making it look like this island of Earth, would be, for one, beautiful, and for two, extremely immersive. Because yeah, you can just see how all the buildings and kind of the whole town has evolved on just the edge of this immense abyss. So I think it'd be really cool to be able to just walk in that and like see what it's like. Um, yeah, walking through the town would be really crazy.
Yeah, it's a huge crater and there's a lot of cool shots too of it, like this one too, like where you can kind of just see the scale of how large the abyss actually is compared to the size of the town around it.
Yeah. So I think it'd be cool to make this, as a theme park. I think it'd be cool to kind of have that rim as like the outer walls of the theme park. You've got a parking lot and all the boring stuff from our reality on the outside of that. But then when you come in, everything is treated as if you're actually on an island. That rim is just a ridge of mountains at the edge of, the island. And you can forget about where your car is parked, right? You can just be immersed in this world, and they're not running around using the word made in abyss all the time, because that's the name of the fiction in our reality, right? In their reality, it's just the abyss. This is just Earth. This is just their life. So I think doing it in a more immersive way, kind of like a Renaissance fair or like True Dungeon or something like that would be so cool. Yeah, and the just living in it almost like an MMO, like a massively multiplayer online game where you see other people and they're each on their own journey. They each have their own story. I think that's kind of what would be happening here. It's not like each of us is attempting to take the role of one of the main characters from the show. Um, do you think would there be options for like who you take the role of, or are you yourself in this park, Joe?
Um, I think you would probably be playing as yourself, but you might encounter the some of the other characters. One thing I was thinking about with this is there's like five different like regions that are identified, so you could have technically five different entrances, and then each of those entrances provides a slightly different experience for the guest.
That is awesome. I always like when there's an option to kind of choose your class or express yourself a little bit in who your character is. I know most modern day theme parks aren't like that. You're just a visitor to this place, but the ones I think in the future are going to be much more immersive, where you get to design a character almost like a role playing game, and that can be done in the theme park or maybe outside the theme park. You come to the park with your own backstory if you want to. I think just having some more options for kind of workshopping a character would be really cool and really immersive. But in
Yeah.
the show, yeah, the most people, well, the show's kind of centered around an orphanage. I don't know if we want to use that iconography or that story setup, um, but yeah, it's kind of a dark world. Like there's not a bunch of like plucky, excitable, typical anime protagonists like just skipping down the street, really excited to go into the abyss. It's kind of a different vibe.
Yeah, I think it also varies. Some regions have a little bit more are a little bit more well off, so they have like you see in the anime too, like some of the more better off parts of town. So that would probably also change your experiences if you started on that side versus the side with the orphanage or the side where they make their first dive into the abyss, which is even a more rough section of town.
Right. And I personally would really love to enjoy just walking around Orth. It's a really interesting, almost steampunk-ish town. Um, it's not exactly the right term for it, but it's kind of between fantasy and our reality, maybe somewhere. So it'd just be a cool place to walk around and get some food, and it would feel much more like a safe place, much more familiar than once we actually get into the abyss, where it's pretty alien, and a lot of times there's not much of a chance that you're going to be getting back to your old life. You're not going to be getting back up to the top. Um, it's very rare, I guess, depending on how far down you go, that you'll be able to return. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that we'll be able to start out with something familiar, something that kind of feels like a theme park as you walk around this town of Orth. But there's going to be kind of this looming chasm in the middle of the island that eventually you're probably going to want to go down into.
Yeah, and I was thinking along the same lines with this is you do want to have some attractions for people outside of just the abyss. I
Mhm.
mean, obviously the abyss would be the main focus of it, but we would still want to have just your more traditional rides and such um in the part of Orth or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And you could do like some roller coasters and stuff, right? I think um, with the amount of technology that they have, it's kind of a darker world, but I could see them even having like a carnival or something in this town of Orth, and it'd be cool to just have park guests be able to visit that, or like it'd be cool to have a Ferris wheel kind of like on the edge of the abyss, just because that the visual is amazing. And I don't know how we would build that if this was going to be a real theme park, because I don't know if you can actually dig that deep, right? I don't think it's possible to make the abyss a real thing. So we might need to have some kind of suspension of disbelief. What are your thoughts on how we could do something like that, Joe?
Yeah, in building this, this would definitely not be something I would foresee being something we could actually build. Just due to like how, and we'll go into it maybe more with some of the layers later and how deep this actually goes. But yeah, that it did seem like a perfect topic for this particular podcast just because of it you do have that suspension of disbelief. But yeah,
Right.
this would be a challenging build.
100%. So yeah, we could either treat it like it's some kind of VR type thing, or we can just not worry about it because it's hypothetical anyway. We can just pretend we actually have the pit. But is there anything in the town of Orth you'd really want to see and be able to experience from the show?
Um yeah, the most iconic things you see in there are the orphanage again, which is kind of a rough thing to have to encounter.
Mhm.
The one thing that kind of stood out to me is I thought the setup for their classes in the orphanage was interesting. How they like kind of stack them vertically. So instead of having them like, I don't know why they do it that way, but it's just something that stood out to me. Is that they have to like
Right.
climb like a rope ladder to get to their desk.
Yeah, their desks are all stacked on top of each other like bunk beds, but like many stories tall. It's pretty crazy. But I guess you get to use the floor space you have, but then you have to have a really high ceiling. It'd be cool though to be able to walk through the orphanage. Um, and there's characters from the show that would be really cool to be able to kind of see as like walk around characters, so to speak. But the characters aren't exactly like warm and fuzzy characters that you'd want to run up to and like hug if you were a little kid. I don't know if this is going to be the most fun place for a kid, because the tone of the series and it's just such a somber place. There's moments of joy, of course, but it's not like a typical starting town for an adventure where there's like upbeat music and like everyone loves their life and people are happy to overcome their challenges. It's kind of a dark, more bleak outlook in Orth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little different, but I do think obviously at some point we're gonna have to talk about the abyss, and I think it might be cool to have some kind of call to action, so to speak, something to motivate you to go into that bit abyss. Because if you just see it, you're like, I'm not going down there. Like, why would anyone go down there? But it could be cool to receive, maybe like you get a letter, you get some kind of character that comes up to you and it explains like a quest to you, basically. Um, it might be cool. I was thinking if you can see a mail balloon come out from within the abyss and like and a letter comes to you, or maybe someone catches the mail balloon and brings it over to you because there's a letter to you from someone down in there who's asking for your help, which is kind of the similar to the main storyline of the series. We could do something like that to give each person a reason to go down into the abyss.
Yeah, I like the letter balloon like mechanic in this show. It's a really cool way. Like you can send letters up like with information, or you can also send up like artifacts, which we see in some of the episodes as well.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting mechanic and good way of getting communication because as you stated, very few people actually, especially at certain depths, very few people actually make the return trip.
Right. And that's the thing about it is it's not just an abyss. There's more going on there. So when I first saw the show, I was thinking, why don't they just have like a helicopter or something they can just go down there? Or why isn't there just an elevator to take you to the bottom? Because they're really motivated to go down there and get more of these artifacts. There's like very valuable resources and new types of technology that can be discovered that are down in the abyss. So there is kind of financial and like cultural significance to exploring the abyss. You're finding artifacts that are really helpful to figuring out kind of the past and also figuring out some new technology. So there's also the reason, if even if you didn't get this mail balloon with "Help me, adventurer, I need your help," if it's just like there's cool stuff down there, like you can make some money doing this. You could treat it almost more like a job or just as a challenge to see how low down you can get, um, and stay alive, because it is basically a horror series. It's pretty serious.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely I would think falls in the horror category.
Yeah, but why can't we just go down there? Like, why can't you just slide down on an elevator or something?
I think they have an elevator for the like from getting down from the top to the to like level 2, I think they say, but yeah, there's not one elevator that can make it all the way down to the bottom of the abyss. I guess it's the technology in the world doesn't exist to build it down that far, I guess.
Right. Well, and there's the curse too. There's
Mhm.
this mysterious escalating symptoms that happen to everyone who goes down there. Um, which all seem pretty unpleasant, and I think we'll talk about here in just a little bit as we start getting into the actual layers. One more like hook that we could have for getting people to go down there is kind of what happens to the main character in the show. She meets this robot boy, Reg, who doesn't have any memories. He came from within the abyss. Maybe that's where the show got its title. I don't know. But he comes from down in there, and so she's really intrigued by what is this robot boy, he's got like really cool abilities that he can do, but he doesn't know much. Like he's pretty he has the the perspective of a child basically, and she's also a child, but it's just kind of interesting. She's like, what is he? Where did he come from? Um and yeah, she just kind of wants to learn more. So I think there's several different ways to appeal to park guests about convincing them to go down in there, whether they have a mind for exploration, if they are like scientifically curious, if it's digging up artifacts appeals to them, or helping this mysterious person who's down there and alive. So there's, I think, several hooks we can get to have people climb on down in there. Yeah, and I think a lot of this could be kind of party based. If you came to the theme park with your family, let's say you have 5 people, you could kind of each have a different specialty. I think, kind of like in a role playing game type of experience where one person is maybe in charge of navigating and kind of making a map as you go. You could have someone who's focused on like offense and defense, like as far as fighting, because there's monsters down there. There's also kind of a crafting and cooking element that I think would be really fun and kind of connects to a certain type of person's brain, like where they're like, okay, let's find these materials, let's turn them into something more useful, kind of like a game like Minecraft. Like, you probably know what crafting is, but and cooking is kind of cool too. It's almost like you're camping on this really horrific camping experience. But I think some of my favorite shots from the show are just like seeing them set up a little camp and like find a place where they can rest their head among all this like traumatic, scary, unknown stuff. So I think that'd be really cool to be able to specialize in a specific thing that you're contributing to your party. I think that's something a lot of us are kind of like craving in an experience like this.
Yeah, that would be a good experience for the guests. And I'm going into your point on the cooking. It is interesting. We'll probably talk more about it later, but it does seem like the abyss has like at least one creature in every level that's edible to some degree. So
Yeah,
that's a
it's
nice convenient mechanic for the show.
convenience is an interesting thing too, because it seems like each of these layers is very different. Like each level of the abyss has evolved to be its own little microcosm ecosystem, um, where the way the creatures interact is really interesting. And yeah, it is cool how there's something that humans can eat at each point. So yeah, I think it forming up a delving party and then delving on in would be kind of the main hook of the theme park. And I'm pretty excited to see where this goes. It's not going to be maybe as fun as a typical theme park where it's kind of about having a fun day with the kids and stuff, because it's much more serious and somber like we've been saying. But I think the main appeal of the park, I think, is to try to explore the abyss.
Yeah, and I think I see it more as like that part, at least the abyss, is more of like an escape room slash haunted house than a like typical like theme park with like rides and such. This would be like just in this case trying to survive the abyss.
Yeah, and it's a challenge too, seeing how far you can get. The challenge of an escape room is there's a time limit, whereas here it's, I don't know how we're going to include like if there are time limits on certain things, but it's just how far can you get, because it's almost impossible to make it all the way. So it's almost like a high score type of experience. And
Y-
the creator of the series actually worked for Konami, the video game company, for 10 years before releasing the series, the manga. So it's kind of interesting that this could translate really well into a video game, a pretty dark video game, and one that's maybe not as fun as a lot of other games, but much more immersive, just because the world gets so much development. The characters and the storyline is one thing, but I think the world gets just as much attention, and the abyss itself is a hugely fascinating, complex, nuanced character almost. It's much more complex than just a town would be.
Yeah, it's I guess I haven't played this, but I would think it's similar to like Dark Souls or something of that vein.
Right, where it's really hard, you die
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's different when it's in a role-playing experience because you are in your own body, and, like, what is it like when you die? It's like, we're not gonna actually kill our park guests. Every theme park, we have to bring that up, where every time we design one, we don't get to kill the guests, but, no, they're going to see how far they can get before maybe the character dies. I don't know how we would measure that exactly. Um, but yeah, there will be some some ways that you won't make it to the bottom. That's for sure.
Yeah, that definitely fits with this park and going into the part about like descending and then ascending. It's like ascending is actually much harder the further down you go.
Yeah. It's I'm excited to get into this abyss because it is such a like mysterious and fantastic place. It feels like each level feels like a different planet almost. It's really cool. But just kind of thinking about it, like maybe we want to have it where your character that you kind of formed as you came into the park and you found a call to action and you formed a party and now you're going in here. That character can die and then you would maybe just start back over. So it's just kind of a go back to home base. Now you're a new orphan that you're playing or a new character.
Hmm.
Um, and then you can either rejoin the same party maybe and you're basically a substitute for yourself, or you could maybe form a new party. It might be kind of fun to do this as like going by yourself and then you get match made. They do matchmaking to form a party for you, and then if any of you dies on your journey, then you start back over maybe with a new party if you want to. So yeah, we would have some options, I think, for being flexible with that. Or if your character dies, maybe you have to give up your equipment, but then you can start back over again as a new character.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, cool. So I'm ready to move on to our next topic if you are. Oh, here we go. Title card, fancy.
I
So
just wanted
yeah,
to include this. This is just really cool. I thought like just kind of shows the overall scope of how massive the abyss is. And it just
yeah,
kind
and
of
it's
shows.
deeper than the ocean, which I think is really
Mhm.
cool. If you look at the island, you can see where the bottom of the ocean is, and that's only what the second layer uh, of the abyss. It just keeps going further and further down. And I love maps in fiction. Like I think it's so cool to see um, what notes people take on their maps, and it's almost like in the Uncharted series, looking through Nathan Drake's journal. I love that kind of stuff. And this series is pretty cool about explaining as they go through what's going on and what's been discovered in the past and what kind of creatures are going to be on this next level, because each layer is totally different. Like they change so drastically and they get more hazardous as you go down.
Yeah, yeah, it's very cool. Like the mythology behind it with all the different creatures and the different artifacts that have been discovered. Rico, the main character, is big on the history, so she's a good like conduit to like kind of let the audience know what each of those things is, which is something that comes up in both the TV series and the movie.
Yeah, and her mother was like a famous explorer, or is. We don't really know the present
Yeah,
tense of her
correct.
mom, but um, there's kind of a different ranking system of people who are cave explorers or treasure hunters. Do you know much about the whistle system, Joe? Or could you tell us about that?
I know, like, yeah, there's a range of whistles. So when we start the series, Rico comes in and she's a red whistle.
Which it's
And
literally a whistle. It's like a
yeah,
badge that they wear kind of around their neck, and they're different colors. Yeah.
yeah. But the one that gets the most focus in it, well, you got your black whistles later on, and then you also get down to the white whistles, which Rico's mother, Liza, was a white whistle. And that's a that's kind of covered a little bit more in the movie of like what exactly is a white whistle and how do you get one,
Yeah,
which I
that
won't
was
go
my
into.
curiosity. Is it like Pokemon badges or something where there's some authority where it's like, "Hey, you did this thing. Here's your reward to show you that you're this rank," or kind of like a driver's license, I guess?
Mm, I think they actually have like a guild that kind of gives out the whistles up to a certain point. So I think it is basically like a merit based earning. But for the white whistles, there's a whole different process that you have to do to get a white whistle. And yeah, it would definitely be fall into the heavy spoiler for the movie.
Absolutely. But I think that is kind of a cool mechanic for motivating people to go further. And if your character dies, start back over and maybe you maybe that's when you get your new whistle. It's like if you made it to level 3 and you come back, now you can be a blue whistle or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how the ranking would go, but that could be a mechanic for showing that you made some progress. And then maybe you've spent your whole day at the theme park, you got to go home, but you're going to come again next summer. Maybe you can pick back up and you're like, I'm already a blue whistle from last year, so now let's go from there. I think it'd be kind of cool to be able to make some progress. It's not just like you start over from zero every single time, um, which that is actually how it would be in reality of this world, but it's not as fun for us. Like I don't think we have that kind of patience to start all the way over from zero. If we're playing a Dark Souls game, you want to at least be able to keep your character, even if you might lose some stuff by dying.
Yeah, I would definitely as a like attendee, I would definitely prefer like having like a saving point essentially. So that way you don't have to go back and do every single mission. Maybe you get some penalty, like you said, with like you might lose maybe a piece of equipment or something, but you can at least have like a continue point.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that'd be kind of satisfying. And there's also little like other collectible type things you can do. There's tons of different species like we talked about down in the abyss. And in fact, within the world, 90% of them are still undiscovered. So I think it's kind of cool if each person can kind of go through and maybe collect stamps or like do a little drawing of each of these creatures that they find. I keep making comparisons to Pokemon. I must be obsessed with that series or something. But it'd be cool to be able to do that too as you go through. And maybe if you survive and you can bring that book to the surface, you get a big reward for that. Like kind of knowing where your limit is. And if you're like, we just barely made it through that last boss encounter, that last big creature, let's go back up to the top and kind of save our progress. I think that might be a cool mechanic because your drive wants you to keep going further and further, but then you're like, if I die, I lose all my progress, or I lose my nice book of all these creatures I've been drawing. I don't want to lose that. So maybe we'll split the party up. Someone will stay here and the rest of us will go, or we'll all go back up and come back down. I think it's kind of fun to have strategic decisions you can make as a party like that. It's so immersive. I love that stuff. All right. So once you go down, you start, yeah, level 1. This is, I think, in the first episode of the show. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. This is right before Rico finds Reg, and up in the corner by like the door here, there's like, I think that's her friend Nat that she's trying to rescue from this creature.
And normally the creatures here aren't that dangerous. It's somewhat safe. It's a decent like training area. But there's still some cool undiscovered stuff here. There's still some excitement and varieties. It's not just it's not boring. It's still exciting. And you can even get some kind of rare, scary creatures that appear up here that kind of they come up from lower levels to feed and then they go back into the depths. So, it's kind of like seeing a shark near the shore or something. Like it's really exciting. It doesn't happen that often, and it's also absolutely terrifying. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the first layer here goes from the surface to 1350 meters. Um, so yeah, this is just the opening layer, the beginning part. And it's not that crazy, but still much more dangerous than being up on the surface back in North.
Yeah. The monster here is like a crimson spitjaw, and that's actually from something in like level 3, I think. I think
Yeah, the
this
creatures are
one.
so cool in this series. Like
Mhm.
seeing the way that they move is so alien and like it really it's amazing what they can do. Like especially if you are into the creatures from like Avatar, the James Cameron film. These creatures are so much spookier and they're so well realized. Like they feel real and they also feel completely alien at the same time. It's fascinating. I'm a big fan of the animation on the creatures and their designs. Just creepy.
Yeah, this thing's like very much like a typical spider, and being someone who hates spiders, yeah, this thing's terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not excited to go to this theme park and see the creatures. Like the creatures it's exciting to catalog them, but I do not want to be chased by them. Like I think it'd be really immersive as like a theme park experience. You could have all kinds of attractions where you have to outrun this creature or figuring out a way of attacking it. Um, but yeah, by the way, Joe, what like ways of defending ourselves would our park guests have in here? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question because yeah, we don't want to like they do need to have a way to defend themselves. So I don't know if we have to like. I kind of see it more as like less of them being attacked and more of just having to solve puzzles to get around it. Kind of again like escape room type thing. But I'm not sure if like we want to give them like weapons. We did talk about having like an offensive person in the party. So
Yeah, and in the show, it's not a typical exploration party, right? It's just Rico and Reg is that mechanical boy that she found, and he has like grappling hook arms. Well, not grappling hooks, but he can launch his forearms and hands out, and he can also shoot. He has this big like incinerator cannon he can launch out of his hand, kind of like an Iron Man, Mega Man type thing. He just has some kind of cool offensive abilities. He's not very skilled with them, but compared to Rico, he can do a lot as far as offense and defense goes. But I do
y-
like the idea of just kind of having areas you can kind of run and hide, almost like hide and seek, where there's this creepy creature coming after you. That would be really immersive and really terrifying. I mean, hide and seek with humans can already get your pulse up a lot, like just hiding and not wanting to be found. But if it's this strange creature and you're in a cave you've never been in before, but you just have to find a nook or a cranny somewhere, like that is an experience. I think
yeah,
that'd
that
be
sounds
so
really
fun.
interesting.
Yeah, because there's not a ton you can do to really damage these creatures, right? Like you're not gonna just go punch them. Maybe you can, but you'll die. So it's not in your best interest most of the time. I don't know if we want to have a reg in each party because it's not the typical way of exploring the abyss. Um, it would make it easier. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, yeah, Reg, and this hasn't been covered. Even anime hasn't even covered as far as like what Reg's actual origin is, but he's highly specialized like items. So like, yeah, we probably wouldn't want to give that to everybody. It might be like a special thing, like you won the
Yeah.
lottery, you get this thing for this particular trip down, or
Yeah, and you could give them like some kind of blaster. They don't show, I don't remember seeing many offensive weapons. I think the creatures are just too powerful to where it's just like run and hide. That's your chance to survive.
yeah, there's some other weapons in the universe. Liza, Rico's mother, has a weapon that she uses, the Blaze Reap, I think. And then Boundred, I always butcher his name, but the character in the fifth move or in the movie, he has got his own like weapon that he uses. So there are other offensive weapons in the universe.
And you could do that too. In previous theme parks, like the Dungeons and Dragons theme park, for example, we had a thing where there's animatronic monsters, but you can hit them with your foam weapon, and they'll react as if it's a real weapon. So I think we could do something like that where your sword can't actually, chop the leg off of something because it's an animatronic machine. We don't want it to fall apart all the time. But if you hit it, it's like, oh, it died. If you did enough damage, we can have a way of making it uh, do that. Or they could just be blasters. I love using blasters on Amusement Sparks because they don't damage the animatronics. It's okay if you aim it at your sister, you're not gonna like hurt anybody. Whereas if you have a foam sword, you're gonna get in trouble for smacking your sister with that. So I think the idea of blasters works really well, but it doesn't really fit in with the universe that much. So we might have to invent some canon here of like, maybe we finally found this relic that we've been able to mass produce that is like this little weapon that fires a projectile that can take down some of the weaker monsters, or if you get the monster trapped first, then you can take the monster out. But we do need a way of like catching food as well too, because you can't just carry a ton of Cliff Bars in your backpack, right? You need to be able to like harvest and gather and hunt as you go through the theme park, which sounds really weird now that I say through the theme park. Maybe I should have said through the abyss. That feels a little more natural. Oh man. Cool. Anything else in layer one?
No, layer one's briefly mentioned in the anime, but it doesn't get a lot of focus. You see it in the first few episodes, but then they pretty quickly get past it.
Yeah.
It's kind of considered, as you said, the layer that where there's not as much of a threat compared to some of the lower levels.
Right. I think even these kinds of like training areas can be really fun if there's still some randomized content. Like if you might go in this little nook or cranny and find a random relic that might be really rare, it might be common. Just having those kinds of collectibles can make even more boring areas really fun. Or having the chance of finding some really crazy creature who just came up to layer one, even though they're not supposed to be there. Those kinds of things are always really exhilarating. All right. So, ready for layer two?
Yep.
Cool.
Let's see. That's this
Yeah.
is another one. Really cool design.
Yeah, this one just blew my mind when I first saw this. It's the like inverted forest. These trees kind of grow down, but it's kind of shows just how whimsical this world is. And you can jump from platform to platform. Like this area feels like a video game level.
Hmm.
And a character like Reg with his like extendable arms is really helpful for getting around here. But maybe we could have a series of zip lines, or you could just do a running jump and hope you make it. Um, in the actual theme park, I don't know how you would do this because if you fall, you just keep falling, like you pretty much die. So you would lose all your equipment, you would lose your book. So I think you'd want to be really careful here.
Yeah. Yeah, the zipline idea seems interesting. That would be a good way to kind of simulate what they do in the anime where they're kind of zipping around on Reg's mechanical arm.
Yeah, and we could maybe set our theme park a few years down the road where maybe things have progressed a little, where people have gone in and like drilled mounts where they can have zip lines and made things a little safer.
Yeah.
And having areas that are ADA compliant, so you could still bring a wheelchair through or whatever would be kind of cool. Having like a safer option, and then if you want to be risky, you can go do the crazy jumping around path if you choose that. Just hand off all of your valuable stuff to another party member who's going a safe way. Uh, so yeah, I don't think we'll spend a ton of time on each of these layers, but
Mm.
it is really cool to showcase some of our favorite creatures and layers as we go.
I would say one thing with this level is we do want to probably have some type of encounter with Ozen, who's like one of the main characters that you meet in the abyss. So,
Yes. And she could do some really elaborate training
mhm.
stuff. She's pretty hardcore. She's a white whistle, isn't she?
Either a white whistle or black whistle. I haven't
She
gotten
might be
back to
black.
that part since I rewatched it.
Yeah, but she's advanced. She's pretty serious, and she could
Yeah, yeah,
definitely teach you some things about surviving the abyss.
yeah, definitely. That's her kind of main purpose in the show. Ends up being to kind of train Rika, and Reg.
Awesome.
So, do we
Yeah,
want to go
she's
to
a
level
cool.
3?
Yeah, I'm ready for level 3. I mean, I'm scared, but I'm ready. I love stuff like this. Just the little visual. Like, what is that? Where did that come from? Is that a pirate ship? Was there water in the abyss at one point? Finding these kind of archaeological things, I think, would be such a cool motivator for me personally as a park guest. Of like, I just want to like draw a little sketch of these crazy things and then go back to the surface and tell someone about it. Maybe our artifacts can be stored in a museum, or we can kind of unlock something collaboratively more artifacts are found and brought to the surface safely. They can be archived somewhere. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah, and
the third
this,
layer is the Great Fault, and it goes up to 7,000 meters below the surface.
yeah, and this one seems more like a spelunking type thing where it's you do have to go through some very narrow and tight spaces to kind of navigate it. So that could be part of the challenge of the amusement park.
Right? It's almost like a maze that kind of goes horizontally and vertically. It's like a three-dimensional maze, like a play place at Chuck E. Cheese's or something, but maybe a lot scarier. And there's monsters in there. Awesome.
Do we want to jump down to 4? I know we got
I
about
think
5 minutes
so.
left.
Yeah. So there are 7 layers altogether, right? That are known to exist, but no one knows basically anything about layer 7. Like the further down you go, the less anyone has ever survived. Oh, what a cool building that is! I love
I
this
know.
structure. It's
There's
gorgeous.
just some great artwork in this show.
Yeah, it definitely is worth at least looking at some screenshots from the series, just to see the beauty. It would be so fascinating and such a cool reward just to be able to see this stuff in real life. And there's different characters that they meet in the series where we might want to add more characters or have different buildings. So maybe you can meet the characters from the show, but you don't have to. You can go your own path, or maybe there's just more options, I think, for park guests to be able to build their own story instead of just following Enrico and Reg's footsteps.
Yeah, and I would definitely say like Nana, she's one of my favorite characters in the show, and meeting her would be
Yes.
like an amazing experience. You can also meet Mitty and deal with the
Yeah.
tragedy that revolves around Mitty. But yeah,
There's some interesting stuff with the curse that happens to humans. We don't want to go into any spoilers, but there's some really interesting fates that your character could end up with if you make it to some of these lower levels.
and let's jump down to, I think I got one for 5, and that's the last one for like the ones that are covered in the anime. And again, this was
Right.
only covered in the movie, not in
We
the.
only have photographic evidence of up to layer 5.
Yeah,
Um,
nothing in the
there,
works yet for 6 or 7.
right? So this is the 5th layer we're looking at?
Yeah,
Yeah, which is called the Sea of Corpses. That's a fun place you want to take your family to, right?
yeah,
And it goes up to 13,000 meters below the surface. So we're really in it by now. If anyone can make it this far, it'd be kind of fun as the theme park being constructed. We can just dig a little further each time because there's going to be a limit where you just can't get through there because creatures kill you. There's like natural roadblocks. Or areas like this part's closed for construction, so let's just turn up the intensity on the monsters. No one will ever make it down here anyway.
yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. But yeah, so there's a lot of characters that are so cool in the series. I don't know if we have time to go through all of them, but
Hmm.
who's that guy, Joe?
That's Bondrewd. He's the main antagonist in the movie,
Yeah, I
and
think
he is shown in the TV series too, I believe.
it seems like they're setting him up to be involved in season 2, I think, which hasn't been, they don't have a date for yet, but there's so many cool character designs. It's a really fascinating series if you haven't seen it, but yeah, and there's so much more to go into. On a typical episode of Amusement Sparks, it's an hour and a half or less, but a little longer than the 50 minutes we have here. But yeah, we always just kind of, it's like this. We're casually brainstorming, conversationally going through what it would be like to have a theme park based on some of our favorite properties. Brave World Anime, this is Joe's group that does panels at anime conventions. Can you tell us a little more about Brave World Anime?
Yeah, yeah. Eventually, we'll be hopefully going back to in-person conventions, but do need to get more into the virtual conventions. Been presenting panels now for 5 to 7 years, mostly in like the Ohio area, Midwest, that's where I'm based out of. But yes, this is my first time doing a panel at a Florida convention, so I can mark that one off.
It's good to be here. I'm loving the weather, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can see their social media there. It's at Brave World Anime on each of those, which is good get. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I host Amusement Sparks, the theme park design show. It's an all ages podcast. I have some episodes on YouTube, but they're pretty old. I don't know. It's mostly an audio format, but social media, you can find us in your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Amazon Music, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, we're nerdy but not dirty. There's no bad words, no potty language. You can share this with your little nieces and nephews, although it is very nerdy. So if they're not into the topic, they probably won't like that episode. But Joe, thank you so much for being my guest. Joe and I have done 2 episodes before this. We did one based on Kyoto Animation and Cardcaptor Sakura. So if you're into those, check out amusementsparks.com or look us up in your podcast app. Thank you so much, WasabiCon, for having us. This has been a blast. It's a little weird, it's a little bit more condensed, but it's cool. It gives me the same experience as presenting at a panel, which I really absolutely love to do. So yeah, thanks for having us. Enjoy the rest of the convention. And yeah, unfortunately, we didn't get to interact with much, but I see all the action on the chat, which is really cool. So yeah, feel free to follow up with us on social media. This episode will be released at some point, I think, in the future. And I always love hearing people's thoughts and feedback. Cool. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of the convention.
Thank you.